All right, everybody, we're live.
Okay. Is that it? Go. Okay. Thanks everyone for being here. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. This is the Planning Committee meeting for March 11th, 2021. I thought I'd start real quick with a thank you to planning staff. As we've gone through the transit-related land use map improvements, that process started here, and I watched the webcam, the virtual meeting, and they're all. I know we're not maybe we maybe got a 95% grade, I guess, with the one remaining, but that's still an A. So I appreciate that, and I think there's a lot of hard work went into it. So I just wanted to say thanks to you guys for that. And I think we're already seeing some of the fruits of the changes from the rezoning coming up. And I saw that the fitness center got bought, the property got bought. I'm not sure what that's going to mean, but it seems like the market was demanding some of these changes too. So I think it's both improving affordable housing possibilities, improving what the market's suggesting, and I think hopefully reducing a little sprawl and making Apex more connected and walkable. So thank you for that very much. Before we get into the agenda list here, can I clarify with somebody, are there schedule conflicts with anybody as far as if we need to change the order of stuff? Maybe Sean or, okay, you, okay. No, okay.
There is, but I mean, don't, I'm here for the dark sky portion of it. I've got like 3 other conflicting things, but obviously you guys are the most important, so I am freeing up my schedule, but it would allow other options.
It's fine to do that first.
The dark sky first?
Because we have to be here the whole time anyway, so it's fine.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll knock that one out, and then you can.
That would be
we'll
great.
things back.
I do appreciate it.
All right. So dark sky. Is Megan Pindell on too?
She's not, Val's here.
Okay, Val. Sorry. Yes. You're the,
So if anyone has
you can
questions.
fill in these things. Okay. Well, Terry, was this your idea? I think it might have. Forget now. I wanted to add this item in here because I know with the Environmental Advisory Board, there's been some research into dark sky related changes. I've kind of pestered Keith staff and Drew when he was here about this since I got elected. We had some development that was objectionable to some of the neighbors as far as lighting goes, and so I thought maybe it was a good time to look into some of these, the research that the Environmental Advisory Board has done, and think about low-hanging fruit, and also maybe if there's any direction we can give as far as what types of implementation challenges and direction may be needed. So I guess, okay. Does staff have anything for that one yet, or is this going to be just me, us asking questions and whatnot?
So I can give you some input and a little background in at least position from an electric utility side.
Okay, yeah.
I have dealt with the International Dark Sky Association for going on 30 years now. They started about 30 years ago, and I was heavily involved with dealing with them. A lot of the, just up front, I'm not a big fan of getting certifications for certification purposes. A lot of what they were originally pushing years ago, and again, you understand this is an astronomer society that want to make sure the skies are dark so that they can see with their telescopes. So that's where this is headed. And they've branched out since then, trying to figure out what's the best way to accomplish their mission. And they have partnered with, they understand some of the energy efficiencies. And so they're doing a very good job of trying to repackage their discussion to get their needs, which is ultimately what they want everything about. Originally, years ago, the technology really wasn't there to do a lot of what they wanted, and their asks years ago were simple. And I hadn't really seen what it had morphed into until recently when I saw the latest and greatest. And boy, has their demands changed over 30 years. Now, I will say in the interim, long before the town got involved in this, when I first got hired about 3 years ago now, I looked at lighting in the town and realized that there was a lot of issues. And a lot of what Dark Sky is pushing and promoting is sort of industry standard now. Full cutoff fixtures, going to LEDs for energy efficiency, and we realize that that's important for the town to do and needs to do. And as a matter of fact, I've had it in my plans now for just about 3 years to change everything in our town over to LEDs and full cutoff fixtures, which is really the essence of what they're looking at. They have, of course, taken it to the next level, which really, I think, puts a lot more strain on the planning department and a lot of oversight into areas that are very intrusive into the community. And again, their ultimate goal is to shut the lights off and minimize the amount of uplighting. Now, as an electric utility or a company that's out there serving the citizens, we don't want to throw light up into the air. I mean, that's really not what we want to do. There are applications where it makes sense. If you're doing certain kinds of lighting, decorative lighting, you want that ability. And I understand that a lot of that goes in the face of what they're trying to do and accomplish. Things like, you know, we're talking about doing a tower lighting job. Well, tower lighting jobs for dark sky society is a definite no-no. I mean, that is something they don't like to see. And again, we're trying to accent the beauty of things. You're starting to be limited when you say that you are dark sky compliant now. To say that, you know, we've got a plan in place to implement a lot of what's in here. It's already been in the works. The only reason it's dragged on this long, and quite honestly, that everything hasn't been changed out yet, is that there's an opportunity with both the AMI system that we're looking at to be able to integrate controls, which is another facet in here, being able to control your lighting. And we see that as a good thing. It's expensive, but I think being able to control our fixtures provides us a lot of side benefits. And we're looking to integrate a control system. Now, if we're going to do a control system, the time to do it is when you change out all your fixtures. So we've sort of been slow walking that because it makes sense. I mean, the energy savings there, this is a no-brainer for the town. I mean, it just saves us money. It has a very quick payback to do it. But we've been waiting to see sort of the AMI, whether we can integrate our control system into that system and save some money, or to figure out if we need to put a separate control system to be able to do things. And some of those things that we can do is maintenance. And I told Drew, I said, you know, every day he used to send me 15 lights that were out. We'll already know that. Our control system will send us a report every morning and say, these fixtures aren't working. Go out and fix them. So we're looking, I mean, that component alone is really good for us. Any sort of fixtures that's malfunctioning, we'll know long before the citizen will realize it. The other ability is it allows us to individually dim lights and shut lights off. So if we got an area, if you're doing something in downtown, you want to do a big splash and keep the lights off and then bring them on. Or if you're doing some sort of event, you want to shut them off. You know, have some big explosion of lights and fireworks and then turn them back on. We can do that with this control system. The other thing which is nice is it'll enable us to minimize our standards. So we can only have, we only need one fixture for our street lights. We don't need different sizes for the applications. We can dim every light. So if we have a complaint, let's say a customer saying, hey, this thing's too harsh, which you will get. I mean, every utility I've ever worked for that transitions to LED lights because of the whiteness of it, they all notice it. There's people who just don't like it. There's going to be a lot of complaints. One of the things we can do with this control system is to be able to dim it. And that's one of those capabilities that will allow me to buy one fixture, have it in stock. I can put it up there and I can just dim the controls. So I don't need 3 or 4 different in our stock.
You can dim fixture by fixture?
Yes.
You can say on this street, in this area, by this house,
Sure.
turn down 5% or 10%?
If the cul-de-sac, there's a person who's complaining and says, hey, it's too bright, I can just shut that or dim it down, which is great because the other citizens in there, because there's a lot, on that same block, there's somebody who wants more light, and there's somebody who doesn't want any light. Being able to dim it down still shows that it's on, you know, so you won't get the complaints from people who say, hey, you want to shut off all the lights. So there's a lot of good to be done there, and we're waiting to implement that. As a matter of fact, we got it in our budget to do that project. And I think that gets you a majority of what they're looking for in dark sky. The problem I have with it, as you read onto it, is it's very intrusive. The planning department, I hate to say, there's the lion's share of the misery is in the planning department. Because now you got to come up with standards for citizens, and they've got timelines. Within 10 years, you got to basically be patrolling individual citizens and saying, hey, on your property, you got way too many lights, you know, and that's what's called out here. And, you know, we're going to sit there and start policing it. We got to come up with a standard and saying, hey, you can only have X number of lights per square footage and all that kind of stuff. That's taking it to the extreme. And then there's the education part where we're being forced as a dark sky compliant society to go out there and educate the kids and the students in schools and participate in dark sky events, basically pushing the agenda of the dark sky, which is really written in here. And that's where I started saying, that's gonna require a lot of thinking, because it's gonna get very intrusive on us. And you have a 10-year window for residential, and we got a 5-year window on anything town-owned. So, we got a pretty short, I mean, for 5 years, we can pretty much get, our street lights. We're looking at, I proposed a 2-year change-out plan, so it gives us some time to implement that. But we can get our side taken care of, but the other part is developing those standards for the residents, rolling it out, and then enforcing it, so it has to be in place by 10 years.
Okay. Well, this is a question maybe for Terry and us to answer. When I say dark sky, I'm referring to the documents that you're referencing. My thoughts about a dark sky Lake City with an official seal and all that stuff is great. I'm more interested in the night sky being darker. I have a telescope, full disclosure. My dad was county commissioner in Bochum when they did their kind of dark sky stuff, and he was very proud of that and talked all about it with me. That's why I'm kind of trying to bring this here to Apex now, and I think being near Jordan Lake, I think, is a good example of where we can do our part to make that. I go out there sometimes when there's meteor showers and other celestial events. So my main thing is that I think the education and the certification is great, but I'm just more interested in the results personally. I'm not sure how you feel. And the rest of council, I'm not sure how they feel.
Sure. And I think, they're intertwined, right? Like, if we do the thing to get the sky dark, the certification isn't too much far behind. I think there's this question about the single-family portion of it, and I know that in our UDO, we do have already a ton of really good standards for lighting, but it only applies to commercial, right? And what ability do we even have in North Carolina to regulate single family to that degree to reach compliance? Does anyone know? I got the impression it was problematic to apply the same detail of standards to single family that we have currently applied to commercial. I don't know if Lori told me that at some point or became one of the discussions. But that's the big question mark in my mind is, can we even do this as the dark sky community wants for single family for individual homes? Or is it something that can only be enforced going forward as like a zoning condition or something that they're going to comply with this voluntarily if it's an issue?
Terry, my reaction to that is, I think I don't know this for sure, but I've been looking around at night constantly in the last 6 months, 3 months after I read the research, to kind of how I'm seeing light, how it seems to be working. And it seems to me like the street lights, rather than the actual single-family homes, at least where I'm driving around, are the vast majority of where the light is coming from. Some people are shining lights in their homes,
But I think the standard speaks to single family as well.
I think there was some of that, and there's different uses for different lumens, I think, too.
And I think also we should recognize that when we say dark skies, and people hear that, and we know it comes from astronomers, people like telescopes, they want to, I remember when they did that conjunction thing with the two planets, and everyone's looking up at it, a couple months ago. I went outside to look at it, and from my house, that was right above the nature park, with all the lights there. I was just like, this is exactly what we're talking about. But outside of those applications, when people hear dark skies, they're thinking about, the new supermarket, or they're thinking about their neighbors who got their floodlights on, shining into their window and stuff. So, which is kind of beyond the scope of what it is initially, but people, it sort of invites a broader discussion that we can think about as well. So, so I don't know, we have a plan on how to move forward, I guess, that Drew sent out, and, there's a price tag on it, and I think most of that had to do with just replacing our fixtures.
It seemed like most of it was the ball fields.
Yeah,
Is that
parks
right?
and replacing all the stuff.
That was like 2/3 of it.
Yeah, and
Which, if you think about light pollution overall in Apex, I think the ball fields matter, but not as much as the streetlights that we have, like thousands of them.
unless you live next to nature park.
And let me chime in on that one, because I want you and for the rest of your cohort to keep in mind that you also passed an ordinance to extend park hours this past winter too.
Yeah, we heard about that too.
And so we have some competing values in terms of what we're asking and then what we're asking on both sides. And so just gotta keep that in mind.
Well, and that was a short-term thing for
Yeah.
COVID, and we caught a lot of from some of my neighbors, again, because I live next to the nature park, because it wasn't even the light, well, it wasn't a little bit the light, it was also just the sound. Like, they were out there, they were loud, they were doing their exercises and doing their, coaches out there cheering them on, and apparently at 4:30 in the morning, whenever, that wasn't looked on kindly by the neighbors. I think we didn't anticipate them being that loud, was the one thing.
If it's high schoolers, I think it's always gonna be.
Yeah, I don't know, man, they were enthusiastic, so.
Okay. I think these COVID things, these complaints, it's just like, they matter, but it's like, come on, people, this world is tough right now, we're just trying to make it a little bit more flexible. Okay, with the fixture control, I had a couple questions about fixtures, before I talked about the control thing. So, I don't even know how it works, so let's say there's development goes in, residential or commercial, and they require street lights. Do they buy those from the town, or, okay, how's it work?
We put them in and it rolls, unless it's requested outside of that, it rolls into the town bill. So they request, or I don't even know if they physically request lights, we put them in automatically. So we'll design it, put it in for the subdivisions.
Okay, so the town has total control over the type. Like, in my neighborhood, when I moved there, they had just the really old school lights with the arm and the orange bulb, and they converted to the more decorative ones that are like the boxes and like kind of like old school to match the Scotts Mill and the neighborhoods nearby. So the town does that, and so we determine what fixtures go where. Okay, so we have control over making sure they're all like the fully shielded and all that stuff. We can prohibit any non-fully shielded lights.
And we've done that. I mean, we've been doing that for the last 2 years. The only fixtures that do not necessarily meet the criteria are the ones out here. You see the acorns that are.
Yes.
Those do not. They do make some that are supposedly compliant. The problem is the way that converting. We can't necessarily convert the fixtures. We did downtown. We changed the bulbs downtown to shine down. The problem is the reflectors that they're in reflect. They're engineered to take the light that's in there and disperse it as wide as it can. So those are engineered lenses, and most of those fixtures, if you look at them on the insides, they have all these refractors in there. So it takes whatever light source you get, it hits that thing, and then it spreads it as much as it can. So there are some fixtures in that style, but we've pretty much stopped recommending those for subdivisions or putting them in unless it's requested. But we're only doing replacements now in existing subdivisions for those, and we're putting, some people like them, some people don't. The old coach light, they look like lanterns. The old lanterns aren't compliant, but the new ones that we buy are. So they're the ones that if you look at it, you can say the lenses are missing. Well, part of it is they pull basically the lenses out, they put the light source at the top, and it shoots down. So when you drive by, and if you ever see a subdivision that looks like the lenses are missing, those are the brand new ones that we put in that are dark sky compliant, that are zero cutoff. And what we're trying to do is, as we get to areas where those fixtures start going bad, the old style, we're replacing at least a section of them with the new style. So we don't want to just have one that looks like the lenses are missing, and the next one down's got the lenses in it. So it's going to have a different light source. And hopefully, when we go through, when we do this conversion, we're going to change out all those. So they'll all be compliant.
All the fixtures will be changed out.
They'll all be fixed, again, and we're going to do that. That change out has to happen just because A, it makes sense financially, and B, it's in our best interest to do it. I'm just holding off to add the control system, which is estimates, depending on the system you go to, it's about $1 million to put in the control system for the entire light.
For the whole town.
For the whole.
Okay.
So what about areas that are served by Duke? Because we do have subdivisions, right, that are served by Duke, not town.
Yeah, so the subdivisions that are served by Duke, the subdivisions themselves can request changes to those fixtures if they want, and there'll probably be a cost depending on how they put those in there. Duke does their subdivision lighting a little different than we do, but they can request to have those changed out. So that could be part of that request. The areas that have Duke streetlights, Most of those lights have already been converted or should have been converted to LEDs years ago and therefore cut off. The only problem with theirs is they use the 4,000 and 5,000 Kelvin color temperature on those. So color temperature won't match. There'll be that little harsher light.
Yes.
We use the 3,000, so we started that from the beginning using the light source that meets the dark sky requirement. So we don't have a problem with that. But some of the Duke fixtures that may be cut off aren't going to have that. They're probably not going to meet that.
We would not have control over those lights if we did, correct?
Well, that's a small part.
Yeah, there's a little asterisk next to the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I'll just say, like, I mean, I'm fine with what you described as your plan. Like, when I saw the price tag of, 5.5 million or whatever, it was not my intention to ask everyone to write a $5.5 million check tomorrow and do the whole thing. Like, my first thought was, well, we gotta replace stuff over time anyway, so you amortize the cost just by your regular replacement budget of going out there. But what's the lifetime on your average, bulb in the pole?
The bulbs in the regular fixtures out there, we may get 5, 6 years out of them.
Okay.
The LEDs they're good for the life of the fixture, supposedly.
Okay.
So when we do the change out, there will be a bunch. They had a pretty good failure rate in the beginning. Supposedly the technology has gotten better. But the good news is if we do them all at one time, they've got a very good replacement. If the thing goes bad within a certain period of time. And typically when the fixture goes bad, it's usually pretty quick. So you put it in service. If it's going to fail, it's going to be within the first year. Then you change it out. And the good news as far as maintenance, we'll have a whole lot less maintenance. We won't.
I know that. Yeah, that's gonna be great for you guys.
So it'll be great from that aspect. So again, it's a no-brainer. We're going to do it. And I think doing what we have planned is going to get you 90% of what's in here without spending anything additional. The ballparks are there. They're going to throw a lot of light. That's what they do. They're there for events. We shut them off. We've got rules. We check about making sure we don't have spillage as best we can into neighboring areas. So I think we're 90% there with what we plan to do without getting that dark sky certificate, or we spend the $5 million and a lot of administrative, because I think that it's to meet the intent, and a lot of it's the small stuff in there. The participations, the education programs, the signage, the annual requirements, the inspections. You're adding a bureaucracy for that certificate. And if your goal is to reduce the light and the pollution in the air, we can do that. I mean, there's things in there about signs. I didn't really get into it, but I mean, they talk about shutting off any signs an hour after dark. Commercial businesses are not going to shut off their signs an hour after dark. I mean,
What?
it's just
I do want to ask about that issue next.
that's probably not going to fly. I can't imagine that going. And they have a lot of, and again, sign lighting is one of the worst because it really, it goes up in the air.
Intended to be that way.
It's intended for that, so there's very little they can do with that, so their idea is just shut it off. Well, that's probably not going to fly. And quite honestly, you don't want it to, especially businesses. I mean, they want visibility. They want people to drive down, especially at night, and be able to see the business.
And there's a safety component too, wayfinding and people being able to find where they're going easily and, not missing their turn, so.
Yeah.
And then there's also if you talk to the police department, there's the whole SEPTED, the community policing through environmental design. At some point, turning off lights and reducing lighting levels too much does have a safety implication in certain areas, so.
It does, and if you read again, they're an organization with a goal and purpose, and I know they've got articles out there about lighting doesn't affect security, and quite honestly, like they say, if it's on the internet, it's got to be true, right? So people have put out those articles, and I just caution you, if it doesn't smell right, it's not right, and that's one of those issues where they say, lighting in and of itself doesn't affect security. Guess what? That's not true. If you light an area very well, I can guarantee you can eliminate security problems in an area. It's just fact. But you'll see stuff out there, and they'll have it on their sites where they'll tout articles by police professionals and security that say, it doesn't really matter. There's things about creating dark spaces, and when we do lighting design, it is a pretty complicated field, and I always tell everybody, that thinks this is very simple. Lighting is one of the most complex issues when you look at light sources and light color. You know, I've worked with Rensselaer RPI 30 years ago, developed a lighting master's program, so we helped develop it. And I got to tell you, it's one of the most physics-intensive courses understanding light and phenomenal light. It's a very complex situation, and the visibility, again, we put light out there for a reason, so people can see and be able to function at night. And there was a lot of changes initially put in by these or recommended that really caused a lot of visibility issues. You know, they told the utilities to go to full cutoffs. Well, the problem initially when they went to full cutoffs is they pulled that bulb and they flattened it. Well, that didn't do anything. All it did was it created dark spots. So as you drove down the road, you had this really bright, your eyes adjust, and then you went into an extremely dark area and then you went really bright. Now, we don't design our street lighting. We don't put our poles where they need to be for lighting. We put them there to support the wires. And then we put lights on them. And then what we do is we adjust the wattage of the fixture if we need to get a little further down the road, and we do things that way. Over the years, the manufacturers got smarter, and when they put that lens there now, there is a lot of engineering into that lens that helps take that cutoff and spread it as far as they can and help with visibility. And as an astronomer, you know, the Midwest, early on, their solution, and it was a failed experiment, they had a light source that was called low-pressure sodium lights. And if you ever saw pictures of it, it was the absolute most disgusting. You thought high-pressure sodium with that yellow hue was bad. These were an unbelievable orange that came out of the lights. And when you measured it, it gave you the light level you were looking at. So if somebody said, I need 5-foot candles here, it had 5-foot candles, but you couldn't see anything. You know, and that was their solution, and it really caused a lot of problems because they've since then taken it all out. Because they've done studies and realized the problem with that light, it didn't have enough color content in the wavelength to distinguish colors. And they say, well, you know, it's not so much the brightness, it's your ability to distinguish between different colors and textures. And we can lower the light level if you can do a better job of seeing. And that's what we're seeing with the LEDs. Because of the full spectrum in that color, you don't need as much foot candles as you did. And a lot of manufacturers are starting to realize we don't need to sell you we used to give you a 100-watt equivalent with an LED, and it gave you the same number of lumens. But you don't need that many lumens anymore because it's such a white light, I can really see very, very good about it. It becomes a seeability issue. So you want to put things out there, you want the color to show because that color gives distinction, gives you seeability. So I'll stop there. I'll probably get a little too deep in sort of what you need. I apologize.
One other question I have about streetlights. First of all, I think the streetlight, the control thing, I'm not sure if that's going to make it in the budget, Sean, but it seems like a great thing to.
You know, I mean, we're working on, like Mr. Mahaffey said, I mean, we know, we're trying to stage it. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, the idea is spacing it, so I mean, we are working to
Okay.
do what we can.
We've
had
maintenance
some
issues
money
that
the
are.
last few years for streetlights, and so it's just, it'll be kind of converting it. It was more so for installation. It'll kind of just be shifting that to those replacements and other areas need needs.
Okay, great. So I guess I have a couple comments more about streetlights real quick. One is the ones on the Peakway. I live kind of where the Peakway, it's Salem down there in the southwest part of town. And the streetlights on the Peakway are great. You can't see them. I think they light up. They're not super bright and they kind of spread out a little bit, but they don't see them really far away. So I think they're great. So, and those were put in maybe 5 years ago, I guess. But then the question is, so the ones on Salem are the old ones still. So are those, when you say the Duke Power ones, are those the Duke Power ones, the ones that are old school, orange, real tall, kind of old fixtures that are down Salem?
If you go past there, there's a section that has Duke lights. There's certain sections that we have lights on. I'd have to see exactly where they are, but any of those teardrop, they've got those drop lenses.
Yeah.
Those are probably ours because Duke should have changed all theirs out. They went 100% LED 10 years ago.
Okay, so those teardrop ones are going to be part of this because those will get the energy savings as well, I guess. Okay.
Yeah, they use basically a third of the energy to put out the same amount of light. So not only are we gonna use, Third Energy, we'll probably be using lower wattage, fixture. And-
Okay.
And if we can dim it, we'll dim it to the appropriate seeability level. Again, it's really more, I wanna be able to drive down that road and be able to see. I don't necessarily wanna be constrained to the fact that I had to buy a 100-watt LED fixture because that was the size and it gives me too much light. We'll be able to dim it down. Hopefully just buy one style fixture and just use the dimming capability to tune it into the environment.
If I could mention one thing, so just want to make sure that it's, with different people working on different things, but we have also had an initiative that we've been working on, electric, public works and transportation and planning, to increase lighting at crosswalks. So just depending on how this moves forward, I don't think we want to risk being able to add additional lighting in locations where we need it along streets, especially where we have crosswalks.
Well, the way I've always seen this is if we get the good fixtures, then town's growth in general and additional lighting that you're talking about can be just added without as much of the, normally you think more growth means brighter skies, but I think if we can have the good fixtures, we can still add those things with safety. I think the safety thing, by the way, is a case-dependent thing. Some areas can be dark and it's fine. Some areas, if they're dark, they're unsafe, I think. So it's kind of, those studies are probably inconclusive because of it's dependent on the situation and the environment. Okay. Yeah, I don't think I don't intend to disrupt those things.
Of course not.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know more streetlight questions. Do you have anything else?
No, I just think, so what's the direction here then?
Well, I do want to ask about like illuminated signs. The complaint we got was from the Lidl, and if you drive down, some of the commercial areas, there's a lot of sign illumination, and the dark sky suggests those should not be happening. So, what is our authority first of all on that, and what is we got into a little bit. What is like staff's recommendation on any changes that may be needed for that? And the second thing is that I do think our lighting things for commercial areas are. I was driving down 64 by Jordan Lake, and there's a gas station in that Wilsonville area that is just super bright, and it's terrible. It's blue too. It's a new one. It's before you get to Jordan Lake.
I love that one.
You love that one.
I love that one.
It's just.
I can't tell you how many times I stopped there purposely.
Well,
It's so inviting. I mean, that light
It
comes in there.
is.
I'm like, man, that's the place I want to stop.
You gotta wear sunglasses when you go there, I guess. But if you want that, I guess that's fine. Anyway, but ours don't have that problem. But is there any suggestion, or after reading these things, that we change anything related to sign illumination?
Well, I mean, our standards now, there are lighting level standards, measured at the property line and maximum levels, on the site, which, when that certification is done, is gonna pick up the site, the light from the signs, which we've taken our light readings and shown that it's compliant with the lighting plan. So there's a difference between too much light and someone's perception of a light source, or just being able to see a light source. I mean, I can see a light from 1,000 feet away, the light source, but that light is not getting to me, it's not spilling onto my property. But where a site has been dark in the past, and now you're adding any kind of lighting to it, it's going to stand out to adjacent property owners.
Okay, let me ask you.
Even though it's not spilling, it's not an excessive amount of light.
So, I drive down 55 down there between downtown and US 1, and there's a lot of lights on buildings that are pretty bright. So those are
non-compliant.
non-compliant. Okay, so the Lidl situation that maybe that's what you're referring to in this, that was dark and now it's not. That is compliant with whatever the things were in whenever it was passed, I guess. Whatever site plan.
It's compliant now.
It's compliant with the current lighting, oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't remeasure, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's compliant with the current ordinance and the approved
Whatever.
site plan.
Measured it. Okay.
But-
So
So the 55 quarter, just so you know, those are not compliant. There are forward throw lights, there are fixtures that are well above, but but we cannot, they're there, they were legally established, they're non-conforming, we cannot, unless they come in for a new site plan, we cannot make them remove those lights. So yes, it is terrible along there, that's the
Yeah.
70s and 80s lighting.
Yeah, I know. Okay, so those, in the absence of so if we pass any kind of stricter sign rule, can we enforce things on existing signage? We're not even allowed to,
No, you can't go back, it's only if they ask for a change.
and that's for the change, okay?
Now, you could do incentives and offer grants for people to switch things out, but most people want more light and not less, so they're probably not gonna comply.
Yeah.
And I wanted to mention one thing about lighting that I believe is a lot of the problem with the newer signs. They're using LED lights, and LED lights are the quality of them has such a blue content to them, they bother people. Whereas in the past, the same amount of lighting using a different type of fixture did not bother people off the signs. We've hardly ever received complaints from signs in the past. It's only been in the last few years, and it's, in my opinion, because of the advent of the LED lights. I don't know if we can require they use like the 3,000 instead of the 5,000 in the sign, perhaps we could do that.
I mean, in the sign cabinet, I don't know how much difference, it's just gonna make whites not appear as white. You know,
Well, the blue quality of that bright white light.
Right.
It's just like the Christmas trees. For a while, you only could get that horrible glary
Yeah.
blue light. Now you can get a soft yellow.
yeah.
So I don't know if that's something that would be my suggestion. It's not that the standards are not correct, it's that the light is too blue. The LED, the quality of it, in my opinion, is painful. It hurts my eye. My husband thinks I'm nuts, but it hurts my eye to look at that blue
Are
light.
they cheaper too, the 5,000?
Yes,
They are cheaper, so the warmer the temperature, so the more expensive it becomes, because we've talked with several developers about, can you switch your color temperature, because they were proposing a 5, and like, can you go down to 3,500 or 3,000, and some have dropped to 4, some have changed to 3,500 or 3,000, and some have talked about the cost, and I don't know if the cost is improving now, like it's starting to drop, so it's more affordable to do the 3,000.
It's gotten a lot better, and I would venture to say the sign manufacturers, again, there's so much new technology in LEDs, it's changing every day, and it'll get to the point where, again, it's adjustable. A lot of these things are adjustable now, and it doesn't cost much extra to do it. Originally, the reason why they went with 5,000 came out, that was the first one developed, and it was okay cost-wise compared to the prior technology, only because it had payback. But then when you started getting the cooler temperatures, it started going up, and they developed it more, and now the cost really isn't really a big issue. I mean, it's not gonna make a big difference anymore, requiring you to go to the other ones. The bigger issue was you couldn't get them.
Right.
So I think the reason why the price was so much is because it was just a shortage of people that were manufacturing those, but I think now that it's up, I see a few dollar difference in fixtures, it wasn't worth the argument for the higher color temperature, and quite honestly, it just caused too many complaints. I mean, there's just a lot of people that bright white light is tough, and, if they're able to do it at a cost that's somewhat comparable, just the complaints alone will offset the cost.
So we're not getting explicit color temperature in our standards then?
Currently, we do not, and so I would say, in my opinion, that would probably reduce the amount of complaints the most.
I think that's a good idea. And also, you mentioned a grant program type thing, and I was wondering have you had discussions with businesses that say, hey, we'd love to do this, we know it's kind of rough, but we don't have the money for it, and maybe they want to switch over to LEDs to save money on electricity, but has there been any interest in the grant, that's the kind of grant program you're talking about? Because we could say, if you do this, it has to be this color temperature, it has to be the LED and all these things that we can kind of limit it.
So prior to the 2008-9 recession, we actually had started a small area plan for what was called Midtown 55, and it's the area on 55 between Salem Street and US 1. There was a steering committee that was made up of many business owners, property owners, some residents of the area, and the desire at that time was purely aesthetics, to make everything look better and not look so outdated, but it would have replaced the lighting fixtures as well. When the recession happened, the council decided at the time they didn't want us to pursue that plan, and it never was resurrected. It's been on our list of would be nice to do. And one of the things that staff was going to recommend as part of that plan was to do, I forget what we called it, but basically a revitalization grant to help them spend money to update their facades, to update their lighting, their signage, to make it, when you drive through, you can tell it was mostly built 70s, 80s,
Yeah,
just
it's
the
awesome.
shapes of the buildings and things, so. I mean, we don't have time to work on that. It would be wonderful to do. I think that it would be a big benefit, to the town. That's one of our main entrances into town, and it's been a source to me of embarrassment. But I will say the one thing, it is our low rent district. There are a lot of, it's kind of an incubator. A lot of businesses start in those shopping centers, and you make it too fancy, people won't be able to afford to go there.
Yeah, and obviously the lighting through there is
Hodgepodge.
not appropriate. It's not done very well. But again, it's more of a revitalization, that they would redo the storefronts and do that. You wouldn't have to incentivize them at that point. They got to rip it out to do the right lighting, because it just makes sense. It's not one of those things you got to incentivize, because it's going to be the only thing you can buy anymore.
Right.
And B, it's cheaper to run. So if they were forced, or they were changing facades or doing any sort of renovations, you're automatically going to get that. You're going to get a better quality of life, better design. So, but again, they're not going to do that in and of itself. They'll probably end up having to revitalize the storefronts, or do some sort of major improvements to the parking area and things of that nature. But it definitely could use. It is one of the out of all the sections in town that really is noticeable. And I don't go around looking at facades and all that kind of stuff. That's one section of town where you think you're driving into Apex, right?
Yeah.
We always say, well, when you get Salem Street, that's really we're in town. We've already left. As soon as you get off of Route Highway 1, you're on there. That's really your welcome to Apex, and that's really not you want jumping out. You're going to put a sign, hey, welcome to Peak Good Living, then drive through that section. That's definitely not the story you want to tell. But I would venture to say, with the way things are going, and I'm not a planner, that section is ripe for just ripping out and redoing the whole section. Basically, McDonald's all the way right down. It's on the verge, and you see it happening everywhere. That those things just got to be. They're all antiquated, all really well. They need to be ripped out and started over. But you would hope that developers would be looking at doing something like that.
Well, let me ask you about, I think, it seems to me like when that road gets redone, that would be probably the time to, if we had such a program, and I know we got, seems like plenty of time to plan a program, if you're gonna wait for DOT to do stuff, but, that'd be a great time they could, maybe while the road's being worked on, they could do these things when they're already being disrupted, and then when it's open, it will look new also. I'm not sure if that's any grand plan for anything like that, but it seems like a logical time to do it.
You're right that is the timing, and it's already starting to happen. The McDonald's is being decommissioned, and the brand new one's being built in front of the Habitat
I saw that.
Restore. And that's because of the project. That's why they're moving. There's no other reason that they're moving. And so you're going to continue to see some of the businesses that are losing parking that they will reinvent themselves into other things. But the property owners that own the properties, they get steady rent from them, and they have not been interested or willing to sell to a developer who would probably tear the buildings down and start over. But maybe once 55 goes through and we've got street improvements to
Yeah, it'd be a lot more
make it look
Here.
nicer.
Yeah.
I do think you're right, the timing of, what is the timing now?
Well, I think it's around 2030. I can't remember if it's 2031 or 2030.
Well, the the state's getting a lot more money in that COVID bill too, maybe they're gonna be put a lot in the roads, I hope.
Maybe.
So, yeah, so with that, that 55, with all of our DOT projects, we planned a substantial amount of funding for enhancements. So that's, they give us a certain percent of construction, but it's really not enough. So then we add a lot to it. I do think that because of the delays, we may not need everything that we expected to have to pay for the pedestrian facilities, because the way DOT is approaching that has changed. So, you know, maybe some of that could be used towards some of the other things that you're thinking about. I wouldn't suggest at this point, you know, changing our plan, because if there's still some uncertainty as far as what DOT will pay for versus the town will have to pay for. But it just may create some new opportunities as part of the project.
Okay, I think we should wrap this up. Yeah, I would say, just in the closing, I think the things you mentioned, I think are really great, and besides just lighting improvements, light pollution improvements. But if staff does have things that are in these dark sky things that seem to be low-hanging fruits, like the potential thing we talked about, I think bringing those forward, and the long term maybe is we can achieve this dark sky certification, but if we can start tackling some of the things that are in this that would benefit, I think we can take the long game, and it may be less of a lift in the end to do this when we do all the other things as we go.
And I'm with you, and I hear what you're saying, thank you for your feedback and your expertise here, and it sounds like what you're doing with the AMI control system is gonna be a big benefit, and something we can really show advocates of this, say, hey, we're doing 90% of it, this is great, you can do things. I'm hoping, you know, maybe someday, if there's still interest when this is all implemented, we could have dark sky events, you know, localized ones, where you shut off all the lights at the park one night, shut off all the street lights around it, and then, you know, get out there with a telescope Saturday night or whenever and go see it. That could be fun.
Well, that was in the dark sky, one of the education things, something like that, so.
Yeah. And to that, I know I read through it, and that education piece is, I think, something that I would expect the citizens who are advocating for this to help us out with, you know, to form a committee, and they could do some of that stuff, but that might be years away at this point. For 2021, like, you know, I'm happy that we're plowing forward with this AMI thing. I think, like you just said, if there's low-hanging fruit that we can pull out of here and the ordinance changes to get the ship going in that direction, I think that's enough to hang our hat on for this year. I'm also still not clear what we can actually do on the single-family residential side of it. You know, I'm worried that there's some restrictions that we're going to eventually. I definitely, you have some feedback, Lori?
Yeah, I was going to agree with what you commented earlier. I think the single-family residential, existing is difficult for the town either to implement any rules, and also then enforcement of that would just be, I think, a practical issue as well. But I think, like, when you're talking about the low-hanging fruit is, future development as it comes in, and the things that we control with regards to our street lighting and those sorts of things.
Street lighting in commercial standards, like can someone answer, are commercial standards enough to qualify for dark sky if we were to fill an application today, or do we have to tweak anything?
There's a checklist.
Yeah.
Much, we haven't reviewed it.
Okay.
There were some no's I saw, the yes or no thing.
Right, so.
Some of it's yes, I mean, there's a lot, it's pretty strong, in many ways, but not everything.
Okay, so yeah, I would be interested in seeing some UDO changes, to push, to orient us in that direction. And as far as single family goes, I guess, I would like to see a standard zoning condition we could ask for if a developer were so inclined. Some language that we could say, are you interested in adding some sort of lighting zoning condition for how you do lighting for the homes and how they're built and stuff like that.
And I think
has something like that, right? Or,
Yeah, I was just waiting for the right time to chime in. So when it comes to the future development, with the checklist, the rezoning checklist that the board has, when we discussed dark sky a few months ago, and the report that board member Harrison made, the 4 things that the board will be specifically adding to that checklist include shielded outdoor lighting, which includes street lighting. And in a meeting recently, they specifically requested just don't use acorn lights, so that it complies with what we were talking about earlier about not using acorn lights. They are going to be lighting that minimizes the emission of blue light to reduce glare. They're gonna be specifically asking if they can use lighting that's less than the, the 3,000 to be used for outside installation, so kind of relating to what you were talking about with that signage. And they are also going to be asking for indoor lighting to be designed to be off when not making use, particularly in empty buildings. So when it comes to things like that, like the Environmental Advisory Board has noted it and are going to be asking developers if they're willing to do something like that, but that's just like some of the citizens.
So I would just say that enforcement is probably the biggest question, because if you have a standard that relates to what's on a single family property or inside of a building, enforcement is going to be difficult if not impossible. So I think when we're looking at zoning conditions that we ask for, we need to make sure that they're enforceable, or else there's, it doesn't mean.
Can't your enforcement be demand driven though? Like someone calls up and complains that, hey, they have these really blue looking lights, and isn't the subdivision supposed to have low lights, or is that not cool?
I believe Bochum actually had a thing about that when they were doing their thing, is there's a nuisance part where they would go look at it.
So our zoning compliance officers work Monday through Friday, so most of the complaints are gonna be nights and weekends. So you all would have a whole new fleet of police officers for zoning. I mean, that's
And again, yeah, I was going to clarify as well that I think when we're looking at the conditions on future development, that these are, general standards not applicable to what an individual may put on their garage light. I think those are going to be very difficult to enforce overall. I think what we need to focus on is, maybe what, if they have amenity centers, what sort of lighting they have in those amenity centers and those parking lots for the amenity centers and their street lights and those sorts of things. I think it's always going to be problematic if you're trying to regulate the lights that somebody's going to have on the side of their house.
So I think I heard you say that their recommendation for street lights was under 3,000, but I think the town standard is what? 3,500,
Yeah.
so it can't be less than 3,500.
Well, that discussion, I think 3,000 versus 35 was what was discussed.
Yeah,
The last one I was at. And there was a question about availability of the 3,000. There was.
Yes, that's exactly right. But it just, this might just be like an outdated version of what the recommendations were, or like from that time before we had that discussion. But for the most part, when it comes to things that like, I guess if any like not residential, because we've only had a handful of residential rezonings come to the DAB. Most of like it's been a kind of a mix of both, but there also just haven't been that many. But there are a few things. I'm trying to pull up the rezoning recommendations checklist with things specific to lighting, because it is a big conversation within the Environmental Advisory Board and like something you're trying to prioritize. So even if there's not specific things that can be changed in the ABO, or when it comes to things like that, like the board will at least try to incentivize it by saying like the ABO would like to see this, whether it's feasible financially or whatever reason. Then council can decide whether it's how they comply is good enough for approval.
Okay. All right. I think that's good with that. Okay. Thank you very much for the info on this. I learned a lot actually, and I appreciate that.
If you ever have any questions, just ask me. I got a lot of useless information. I'm sorry for keeping you guys long. I know I went off on some tangents, but.
Well, I think, we discussed 2 hours instead of an hour and a half because we've been tangenting this entire committee.
They need
Stuff here, but,
Thanks a lot.
thanks. Thank you. I will, maybe we can report to the EAB this discussion a little bit, and that we are in support of, we heard their suggestion about supporting this, and we are actively doing that as well.
Yeah, no.
I think that'd be helpful to hear. Okay, let me look at the agenda again.
Alcohol sales?
We got some small stuff. Let's knock those things out, and then we can get the biggie. Okay, so alcohol sales. There was discussion, a 10-day, it seemed punitive as well. I think there was a question whether it was a punishment type thing, so it was heard back here. So let's.
Okay, so basically, back in December, we had 2 events at Peak of the Vine that were held without permits. So notices of violation were sent to the owner for both of those. We also were asked to request their receipts for their receipts within 30 days. And then the notices of violation, they were just one-time civil penalties. We have never received anything from the business owner in terms of receipts or the payment for the civil penalties that were assessed. We had been advised by legal that the way the UDO was written in regard to the receipts, that we could not send a notice of violation or assess civil penalties for failure to turn in the receipts because of the way it's written. And so that's why it had come to council for consideration. You all said you didn't want to take it up at that time because you wanted to wait for the overall solution to kind of our festival district or whatever we end up calling it downtown, which we will work on this summer after 160D amendments, which are massive, to the UDO.
You said after what now?
160D, it was the state law change that was done. It was supposed to have gone into effect last summer, but because of COVID, they gave all the municipalities and counties in the state until July 1st of this year to update our ordinances to be in compliance with the new state law. They completely redid all of the planning and zoning laws for the state.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So it's combing through the entire ordinance and updating section references, there's procedural changes, it's very substantial, and I'm like about 85% through the draft to send to legal.
Sounds terrible.
And then I get to explain it all to you,
Yeah.
before July, so.
Is it a weakening or is it just a clarification of stuff?
They consolidated, for the most part, the county and the city standards, which were in separate parts of state law, so they consolidated those, because a lot of it was exactly the same. And then there were some other things, just cleaned up, modernized some language, simplified some things. There were some changes fortunately, that we're already compliant with, that other towns, it affects them more. But it's quite comprehensive to get through.
Okay. There are a couple of school book articles about it. There are a couple articles.
Okay, I didn't see this. Okay, I'm sorry you had to do that.
And so that's the reason why we're not gonna be able to start on this overall look at our ordinances until the summertime, after that's adopted. And so, we're happy to wait. We won't bring any other UDO amendments in regard to the receipts. We won't even request the receipts again from Peak of the Vine. Excuse me?
Sorry, I was waiting to, finish up, sorry.
Oh, the only other thing I was gonna say was, we do have these two outstanding notices of violation, and it's really up to you all if you would like us to, we have not sent a demand for payment yet. If you would like us to do that, we can. If you would prefer we not do that, then we need for the property owner to come to town council to ask for the civil penalties to be waived or reduced, because we cannot do that on our own. So that's mainly the thing I wanted to ask you all today.
Okay. So what I was gonna say is for context from my side, like, cause and you were there, you saw that there was this incident in December and November, there's this neighbor-to-neighbor financing going on here between Peak the Vine and their surrounding neighbors. They came to us and they also talked to us individually and was like, hey, we feel like you guys are really targeting us, we're being targeted by our planning department, we're being targeted by the police departments coming by. And we were all like, no, it's not going on. There's just, you gotta work out with your neighbors, all that stuff, trying to calm everything down. And then a month later, we got this UDO amendment, and I was like, oh, it kinda seems like we are targeting them. Like, so that's kinda why I got the pushback there, is I felt like, I know you were just following the rules and you were asked by the neighbors, but it almost felt like your department was being weaponized against them at that point.
We only do compliance based on complaints. The complaints were daily to the town manager, and the town manager at the time indicated to us that we needed to follow all the rules in the UDO. So that was our marching order, that's what we did.
I hear you. Have we ever requested these receipts before from anyone else?
We had talked with the group when we did UDO amendments a few years ago. So we had talked with Southern Peak and Peak of the Vine and Blueprint and all those folks. And you were there. That's how we came up with, it actually was a lessening of the requirement.
Yeah, for microbreweries.
And
mainly,
so
right? Yeah.
they all at that time basically told us, if you request our receipts, we will not be in compliance. They had already told us that. We already knew they weren't in compliance.
Yeah.
What happened was the neighbors read the ordinance and demanded that we ask for the receipts. And once people point out you're not following your own rules, we can't really just ignore it. So it does need to come out of the ordinance, which is what our suggestion is. And so for the time being, I think, we're just not gonna enforce it. But we do have these two outstanding notices of violation. They're $500 one-time civil penalties for each event because they did the events with outside events without permits, which we have issued these before to other businesses. That is not unusual. So we just need to know if we need to do a demand for payment, or if you would like for, and the property owner has to come and ask you. You had this with a stormwater issue recently. The owner has to come and ask you to be reduced or removed, which we haven't told them yet if they should do that or if they should just pay us. But it is $1,000, and I understand it's very sensitive, and they have, as far as I'm aware, have been in compliance since that time. We've not received any other complaints,
Yeah.
so.
That's the important thing, is the situation calmed down, or, we're not, the neighbors aren't still,
Once it gets warm though, it may,
So coincidentally,
Okay.
I got an email, I saw this morning because it came through last night from one of the residents. Now, it wasn't a complaint.
Okay.
It was, they're trying to follow up with what's going on. And so this morning, as we were getting started, I told them, hey, I'm actually in a meeting this morning. We'll have some talk. And I know you sent an email out too about some suggestions, things, noise-wise and things like that. So they're wanting to follow up. To my knowledge, there have not been complaints, but they are curious about what the follow-up is and what we're working to do. So, I'm just trying to meet with them first of next week.
okay. And as far as the actual ordinance part, with this, if we update this downtown thing, do we think it's likely that we will simplify the microbrewery and bar and all these uses so that you wouldn't even need to have a fraction of the on-site permissive, whatever the thing is that we're trying to regulate here?
So I think what we discussed was treating similarly situated businesses. I think they would still keep their use categories, that wouldn't change, but they would be treated similarly. So it might be that you all decide you want to do away with the percentage limitations.
Which would then require them not to turn in any receipts anyway, so there would be no
Correct.
time thing.
Correct.
What are the other requirements, once you're in that use category of a bar, besides the receipts, are there other restrictions that are placed on you?
So bars are considered adult businesses, whereas places that allow children to enter them, like restaurants and microbreweries, are not considered adult businesses. One of the things about bars that has always not been popular with our citizens, the police department, and elected officials is that they are allowed by state law to stay open until 2 a.m. and their business model typically is to stay open until 2 a.m. And so there are specific requirements that they cannot have outdoor patios, they cannot have outdoor music, and they have to get a special use permit, which means that you all would get to look at the locations that they are proposed. Otherwise, they would be allowed wherever restaurants or microbreweries are allowed, which is typically, planned commercial, downtown business, light industrial, tech flex, that type of thing.
Okay.
So, it's one of those things that to do a true bar, which means your alcohol receipts are more than what you would be selling in off-premise alcohol, wine, whatever, or food. It's just a different type of business, and historically has not been supported in Apex. I mean, people literally have said people can go to Raleigh for that. So if that's changed, we can change it. It's just that neighbors are likely to be more upset about noise at 2 a.m. than at 11 p.m.
Yeah.
So the options are push businesses towards, make it easier to actually have them classified as what is on the ground, their actual use of a bar, that would allow them to stay open later, which is the big thing that might turn more complaints, or kind of keep the status quo of, let's pretend that you're a retailer who happens to sell alcohol, that is 49% of your business or whatever. Is that kind of where we're at?
There's two things,
I
notice
missed,
violation that we can talk about too.
Yeah, sure. So, the notice of the violation, I guess where I'm at is, I don't care about the money. I think we just need to get them to resolve their dispute. And if we can use waiving the notice of violation as a leverage point with the business owner to say, hey, let's make sure your behavior stays compliant, we'll waive this fee for you, that's a win for everyone as far as I'm concerned.
But then we would need the 10-day thing if we're gonna do that, right? Because we need to have some kind of enforcement to clarify the use. No, okay, oops.
well, what I've heard from you all is that you do not want to enforce getting, basically the UDO we can't do anything about the fact they haven't turned in the receipts.
Yeah.
So you didn't change it, you don't need to do anything, we're gonna do a overall look at the whole downtown and figure out what everyone wants, so we don't need to do anything with that.
Okay.
We requested the receipts, they refused to give them to us, we cannot fine them or or civil penalties or do anything else with it, so we're just gonna drop it, there's nothing else to do.
Yeah, and I think if we start enforcing it there, and there's, like we said, at least 3 or 4 other businesses that are quite popular, people enjoy, I enjoy them, that we have to also drop a hammer on them. Frankly, I don't like our rules in this regard. I think it's, it's a little bit too stringent, and I think if people are bars, we should be able to call them as bars and regulate them accordingly.
I've loosened things some, but I haven't. I think this council is a little more permissive than even
I don't wanna go to Raleigh, man, that's too far.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so if the intent is, I think it is, to go with this, we're gonna relook at all this stuff, and, we're gonna, I saw the downtown plan, stuff had like sound, things as part of the fixes anyway that we're thinking about in that same area. Nice survey, by the way, I thought that was great, the 2-minute survey was fantastic.
Okay.
Anyway, I did yesterday, that's why I'm fresh on it, but, that kind of thing combined with the overall look, I think both those things means that we can push this issue. We can say, we're not gonna really do much on this, right? And we're gonna take a close look and involve everybody in the summer whenever this happens.
Yeah, because we're gonna have to bring the business owners back in and talk with them again. Lori, are we able to put the request for waiving the payment on consent, or does it need to be new business?
It's up to the council whether they want to talk about that item or not. If they don't want to talk about it, it could be on consent.
I think that's fine.
Yeah, and I think the key conversation here isn't between the council at the meeting, it's gonna be between the town and whoever's dealing with them and the neighbors, and let them know that we want everyone to kind of chill out. And then, as far as the business owner's concerned, like, we're gonna waive these fees with the understanding that that you're gonna be a better neighbor, that we're gonna talk with your neighbors, we're gonna make sure we're, I know there was a set of incidents before, but if we can somehow help use this issue to ensure that things, go more smoothly in the future.
Well, the waiving is gonna decrease our leverage, right? It's gonna make the neighbors mad for doing this, I think.
The waiving fees?
Yeah. It's in theory helping the.
Well, like I said, I fundamentally, I don't think the neighbors are looking at the UDO and weaponizing against one particular business in a way that hasn't been done before, and I object to that.
Okay.
So,
Well, I will, no, the notices, so the receipts is new, but the notices of violation, we have issued that against Doherty's in the past. We've done some other businesses that operate as restaurants, but have a lot of bar activities.
you're right.
So that is not a new thing.
Sorry, you're right. We're conflating 2 different issues here.
Yeah.
Sorry. So
That's okay.
in terms of so I was just talking about the receipts. About the notice of violations, they had some outdoor events they shouldn't have. They were allowed when they shouldn't have been. Neighbors got mad as they should have. That's how this all started. So for here, I'm leaning towards leniency again, because we were in a COVID situation where these guys were trying to survive, and they were trying to be creative, and maybe they stepped over the line a little bit. The thing to do is have them step back from the line and be better neighbors. We don't have to necessarily I think the point has been made at this point. And again, we can use that fine as leverage to hammer that home and say, hey, we do want you guys to be good neighbors, we want everyone to both, continue to survive as a business, but also, be cognizant of the fact that you're 40 feet away from my house.
Okay, let's not put it on consent, let's do it on new business, we can talk about it, and
Okay.
we can reference the fact that we're thinking about downtown improvements, we're thinking about an overall kind of plan that would be a bigger, comprehensive look at everything, including sound mitigation, and maybe that can be part of that discussion a little bit is, this is a small thing, but we're trying to take a holistic look at this, and that can be part of the discussion. Okay,
But again, we have to not conflate the two issues, I think, is the point Diane was making. That there really is two separate things here. There's the receipts and there's you had a party, you shouldn't have had a party.
yes, the receipts are because of COVID.
No, the party was because of COVID.
The
The party
party
was like, hey, we
was
want to go
receipts.
outside because we can't go inside, we still want to sell, 49% of our alcohol that we, of course,
Okay, and the receipts are because we're gonna address everything kind of holistically.
The receipts are because the neighbors were upset about the party and looked at the EDO and said, hey, how can we make them stop?
Okay.
Oh, they're not complying. But also, plenty of businesses are not complying because the rule is overly strict and we had previously talked about removing it. So that's why I was uncomfortable with enforcing because we're about to change this.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's good. Is that a good path forward?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Who is currently talking to the business owner? Is it
I'm not.
Sean? Is it
Colleen. Colleen, are you talking to them?
She has her hand up too.
Okay.
Oh, she wants to talk.
Yeah, so yes, I am talking to both Michelle and Nicola at Peak of the Vine. I will say that this is definitely the larger issue that we're going to address because this is just going to keep coming up. And they are essentially the business that's sort of, I guess, first in line to do some of these activities that we're definitely encouraging folks to do to kind of create that entertainment vibe in downtown. And it's just going to continue to happen if we don't address it. So they really are first. And my also understanding from the resident standpoint in that neighborhood, it really is sort of talking to other residents who live on North Salem Street and further. It really is just that those homes that sort of back up in that cul-de-sac right there that seem to have the largest issue. And I think that's more of a noise thing. So when we've talked about this within the downtown design plan too, and I'm sure Shannon can talk about this as well, is like ways that we might be within the downtown design plan when we're looking at the parking lots. Are there ways that we can sort of mitigate some of the noise issues that might be addressed with some of the downtown changes? So hopefully we can address some of the residential concerns, but this is definitely an issue that's going to essentially keep coming up. So, which is why we're essentially looking at the larger plan of creating an overlay district for downtown.
Yeah, and I think part of the solution might be when they're having these events outdoors that are going to be louder. Like, I think if there's more notice and the neighbors are aware it's happening and they have the hours of it, and they know next Friday there's going to be a party from 9 p.m. all the way till 10:30 or whatever. It's just the way it's going to be. Like, if you anticipate it, it's not as bad as trying to put your kids to bed and then all of a sudden hearing the band start playing and not knowing it's coming. So I think it's a matter of communication too, can help smooth things over. So.
Yeah, and I think that some of this is growing pain. I mean, this is growing pains. I mean, I've lived in cities all my life, and it's just kind of like, I think that what we're talking about in some ways here is like, downtown was a very different place 5 years ago. It was a different place 10 years ago. So, we're dealing with some of the growing pains here. But if we want to have a successful, economic engine in downtown and continue to do some of these Main Street things, as I'm sitting in a North Carolina Main Street conference this week, we've got to address these issues at a larger whole scale level.
Well, thank you. I think I'm going to skip RCA for now. Sorry.
Okay.
Let's go to affordable housing. That's going to be the discussion. Thank you very much, Colleen, for that. Okay. And I think I invited Suzanne Harris from the HBA or somebody from the HBA on as well. There may be times when I'm not sure if they're on, but if there is a chance to chime in, I'll kind of let that know. I think this was going to be a staff discussion, but I think you guys can add some input when appropriate. So just thank you for kind of hanging with us on the previous discussion we've had so far. Okay. We have a great affordable housing plan. I think we're already proud of that. The incentives section of that was one that was a bit controversial in the plan, but the wording of it, but I think the intent remains, encouraging affordable housing with various things that would make it cheaper and easier to build those kind of units. We've done some transit-related things which I think have been fruitful, but I think that other section, that was a different section than this. And so my question to, I'm not sure who, but probably Shannon or you guys on this side, is in the discussion and creation of the housing plan, there was a high-level review. Are there things that we can dig into now that are, once again, this kind of like dark side, low-hanging fruit that came up, that are things like, okay, we can have some easy, quick wins that we can hash out now as we go forward, that maybe instead of waiting years to have this thing, some implementation happening with the bigger things, the easy things to do now.
So, in regards to the incentive zoning recommendation, I would definitely not say that's gonna be an easy, low-hanging fruit item. And you heard, that was the one recommendation that was really controversial, even just in the way it was worded. So, we have kind of drafted up how we would approach creating that as staff, without consultant assistance. And I think that we have a good way forward. But my preference is to make sure that we have our housing program manager on board who would have more expertise in this area and time to really devote to it. And make sure that we have a collaborative process with all the stakeholders who are interested and have told us that they're interested in this particular recommendation so that we can craft it carefully. Because I think one of the things that we heard and is true in the research I've looked at is if we don't do it carefully, we can create the opposite effect and actually raise prices of homes. We really have to make sure that the incentives are truly incentives. So we want to make sure that we're very careful about how we proceed. We do have an intern right now, and we have gotten her started collecting some research, looking at what other communities are doing in regards to incentive zoning, what's working well, what's not. But I think to actually have a policy in place, we should take our time with it.
Okay. Let me ask you a different kind of question then. So the transit-related changes to the land use map initiated here, and we talked about like by right type things that kind of evolved, I think, appropriately into how we did it. I wasn't even thinking about affordable housing when we were doing this. That was, and then when I saw that on the housing plan, I was like, oh, we're gonna knock that out like before the plan. It was quite before the plan came out, but it was close. So even in the absence of having a housing manager, are there things related? I was thinking about things like parking minimums or ADU rules that we can do in the absence of having a housing manager that maybe organically lead to affordable housing like this transit thing did with this recent zoning that we have coming up, but are also good ideas anyway. And parking minimums are one that I think a lot about, like, because there's way too much parking in this country, and I think it takes up a lot of room, and land's expensive. So I'm not sure that's one that was necessarily going to be part of this incentive thing or not, but I think it can.
We did already reduce the parking for apartments 3 years ago.
Right.
Now, and so if something is coming in as an affordable housing project, we can look at a zoning condition to reduce the parking even further, because now we know the percentage of people that are gonna have more than one car in a household is lower. And so we can use zoning conditions to assist with affordable housing projects.
And we have.
We
We have. For senior housing, it's been down to, I think, 1.5.
1.1 for
That was the one that was
senior.
saw.
And that is one of the examples of an incentive that was actually included in the plan, is parking reductions. Just one of the possible examples. We have been working on applying for a grant to help connect some of our lower income areas to our transit. So we actually have really positive feedback on that, and now we're working on the next step. It takes a lot of time. So, that's coming forward. Apex Cares is already in place, and we had some plans to work on some, information about that and training people who are actually out in the public and may see some opportunities for people to benefit from that program. So I think there's some things we may be able to move forward in the interim with that. But again, I would really like to focus on hiring the staff that we need, getting them in place, having those experts in this area to help us move forward the bigger recommendations that were identified for near term. And incentive zoning, I think, needs to be number one. I think that was one of the highest priorities.
Okay.
And I will just say for ADUs, our ordinance is pretty good. It doesn't require additional parking.
It doesn't, okay, I couldn't tell.
It does not.
Okay.
And so, we've been trying to we're trying to keep ADUs as an option in subdivisions, so we're getting the condition where they don't prohibit it in their covenants. Part of the recommendation from the plan is to do a pilot program, and anytime I see things that would be helpful to us doing a pilot program, I've been sending them to Shannon, so so there's other communities that have done some of these things that we'll be able to do once we get our staff on board.
But that is one of the long-term recommendations. So I do want to keep to, that we had a set of near-term, mid-term, and long-term priorities in the plans.
But to Brett's point, the ADU stuff is actually current planning, and so we might be able to get ahead of the housing folks on that piece. But, keep giving us new assignments, we don't necessarily have time to work on everything. So we just need to know what the highest priority is, for each work group. But I think the current planners could be working on that, separate from what the housing folks are accomplishing. I mean, we coordinate with them, but you always have to have somebody in charge of it and, putting the effort forth and meeting with, folks that are experts in that area, so.
Okay. Is that housing manager part of the budget?
So at this point it is, because we know it's a high priority for council, and so it's been prepared for, and as of right now, it's including the budget. There's no reason to think it won't be moving forward. The option I would bring to you if you want to do it, and council as a whole need to approve it. If council wants to go ahead and approve the authorization to add that full-time position now, they're not going to start tomorrow, but we could go ahead and get them on before July 1, if that's something council wanted to do to kind of keep things moving. So if that's something you want to bring forward, then we'll get with HR and get, we've got a draft job description already, so it's just working out a few tweaks and then actually advertising it. But if that's something that you want us to do, I would imagine the full council would be in favor of it as well, and y'all can talk to your cohort about that. But
Yeah, it might be a personnel committee topic also that may be the lead on that, but I think that it would be the recommendation from our committee that we would endorse that kind of action to happen because of the things like these, these zoning things that we would kind of be discussing here. Would be good to have that expertise.
Okay. Well, what we can do then, there actually is a personnel committee next Thursday for other things for budget related, but we have time to change that notice, and maybe we can add this onto their agenda because it won't take long. This is a 5-minute conversation if that's for them, and we can get it added to them so that now you'll have it coming from the planning committee and personnel committee to recommend to council, and if that makes, we could actually even have it on the agenda for March 23rd. And then we'd start the process, and they'd likely maybe be in by May, so a couple months ahead of where they would. So we're just giving time to advertise and then recruit and actually go through the hiring process.
So, can I add? So the other community establishment of the Housing Advisory Board was also near term, and that's something that a board, I think we would want to have in place, kind of as we're thinking about this incentive zoning conditions, to really have that kind of group to bounce things off of and weigh in on and make a recommendation to town council.
Let me ask you about that, board. Yeah, I was thinking about this incentive zoning and how the Affordable Housing Plan Committee was a mix of people, advocates for affordable housing. There was builders, there was people who built, the HIC and these type folks. The things like incentives, type related things, I don't know how the advocates, do they have any, they want more affordable housing, they would probably support any incentive that would work, I guess. But the builders, and maybe this committee would be the ones that would kind of weigh, okay, we want to encourage affordable housing, how can we do it? And then our job is to weigh that with the potential negative impacts to the community that increased density or reduced parking, whatever the thing is. There's going to be consequences to this, and so, so the committee will be a mix of people that are advocates. Like, it would need the folks who are like the builders on that, or like the people that are technical would be the ones, I guess, on that committee that would be the most important people to debate this issue. The whole other issues related to affordable housing, I think, would be the whole group, but that one seems like it's more of a targeted thing.
I think even with this particular issue, there would be value from the different perspectives that you'd likely have on that board, because even among the advocates who may be more ready to support different incentives just to get the units, there was also a lot of concern about amenities and having landscaping and, nice places for people to live. So I think that there'd be valuable perspectives from a varied group. So then incentive zoning, Apex Cares, and then benefiting from the low-income housing tax credit gap financing, which we have, a potential project in the pipeline. So those were the main things.
Are they actually gonna get?
Is it perfect score apparently?
Perfect score?
That's what they said.
Do we think we actually have a chance of getting?
Oh, yeah, oh, absolutely, it's a great location. I mean, it is, it's literally within walking distance of 2 grocery stores. It's got a really good, and,
I guess I'm just a little scarred from Broadstone, because I remember like hearing at the time that, we're gonna get this 9% financing, it'll be great, and then, 9 months, a year later, they came back.
well, it's one of those things that, it's extremely competitive. And it's just there was no reason why the DHIC project didn't get approved, except they had another project that was phase 2 in Garner, and they're only they have extra points that they can give toward projects, and because it was finishing out that project, they gave 1 extra point to the Garner project, the DHIC Garner project. That's why that one got funded and ours didn't. The state could have funded both, but this is across the whole state, so they're not, they picked 1 or 2 in the triangle. So now DHIC's moved to 4%, which is actually what Durham is focusing on now. They aren't even focusing on the 9%. They're focusing on the 4% because they could get a project every single year, not once in a while. But because we didn't do a 9% here in Apex, Evergreen now has a better chance because they know we tried twice to get one in Apex, didn't get it. So I feel really good about the Evergreen project.
I just want to note from that, I was looking back at the affordable housing plan and how it had been a long time since when it had come up since the 90s, and then 2 kind of that were tripling or quadrupling the amount that we have available. It was just, it's a good trend, I will say. Another question I had about affordable housing in short-term versus long-term was, it's not just affordable housing, but just projects in general and facilitating those. Is the town involved with, I was looking at the aerial and I forget what we called the category that was in downtown, where that was that mixed use, right near the Holland's Jewelry one. Forget the category. Anyway, that one changed and was approved. It seems like there could be a potential for the town to build parking like we did on the Seaboard just recently, back near the train tracks. And I was wondering, has there been any talk about like the town maybe undertaking a project related to parking like that to facilitate a development happening that they wouldn't have to build a bunch of parking? They could use the land better. And I'm thinking about, I think, my understanding is that like Bond Brothers and Carey, that the town contributed kind of some development to the parking there to kind of encourage that kind of whole area to redevelop the downtown area. So what, if anything, is happening on that front? I know there's a little bit of parking back there now on the CSX right of way, but not all the way down to the office park. And it could be, I guess in theory, maybe not. So I was wondering if those kind of projects where it was like town-related parking that could facilitate affordable housing or other kind of development.
So, we've been focusing on the downtown area in terms of town parking projects. And really, there were specific metrics in the downtown plan, 200 parking spaces within a 5-minute walk of downtown, with 100 of those being within a 3-minute walk. And it's kind of starting to segue into something that we want to talk about anyway, but we're looking beyond the kind of main public parking area and potentially in some other locations to
On Elm Street, I noticed.
Yeah.
I noticed that.
To add, reach that metric. But that, we have not talked about that far away, because we're really trying to get as many within that 3-minute walk of the main block based on the downtown plans, and that's been our project that we're focusing on.
So if someone wanted to redevelop that Holland Jewelry place, and they said, we can do it, but we need some parking somewhere, would the town, how fast can the town move to say, hey, there's this right of way that we've done the Seaboard, we worked out with CSX, and maybe we can do it again. I know that was a difficult process with CSX, but would we be agile enough to facilitate development like that if they came tomorrow to say, we need parking, can you help work with us on this, and we'll put exactly what you want in that spot?
Yeah, I think that spot is trickier than what we're looking at on Elm Street, because we're trying to stay away from the railroad
Yeah.
side intentionally, because it was difficult before. But I think, that involves several departments in terms of how agile we are or not, to be able to respond to that, and the will of the town council, so.
Okay.
I mean, there's always gonna be projects that can potentially arise, right? Partnerships that can be developed. And there's lots of things we can do, and it's just step by step for us right now, in terms of what we're doing. I mean, one of the next things that somewhat related, we don't know what Station 1's gonna look like. That project coming up, we're gonna start hopefully in the next year or so, that planning piece. But that might be similar to something you're looking at, because we're talking about the potential for a public-private partnership with that redevelopment. And so there's likelihood there's gonna be a question about parking for that, so how does that accommodate? So those things are gonna come up. I mean, we're gonna have to figure out what our role is with those types of projects. I think it's just a matter of where we go. I mean, specifically where you're talking about, again, it seems like you could redevelop that area as a whole, right? And it's just one step. It's just how do we get to that piece? And we're working our way kind of from that 100 block kind of out. So just trying to work.
I think it's appropriate.
Yeah.
I look on IMAPs all the time and like, what else can we do?
Yeah.
Well, they're pinpointed. I mean, we know, we've identified a lot of those areas too. I mean, I think Diana, we even talked about that area for projects that could come up, like if you close Moore Street, and then what do you do, for that area? So those things will happen and will come. It's just a matter of the time it takes to get there, and then once we get there, what those partnerships look like.
Okay.
But anytime you have the ideas, bring them up. I mean, we've got the list, so it's not going anywhere. What we ignore, it's just we just gotta have to add it to the list. I think.
Okay.
So I think that vacant seems kind of, Holland's Jewelry is issued 2 CCCs for that vacant space recently. So
They did what?
we've issued 2 CCCs recently
I'm not sure what that means.
It's like a business license.
the business.
Okay.
Yeah. So
more just, if you go on Moore Street when we're at dead ends, if there could be parking, there's a little bit of parking that right away already, but there could be 30 spots. They could, in theory, use up that entire little rectangle part that's just grass right now that we have as mixed use as something. And people could park and walk to their apartment or whatever. If the town could partner, I assume you could say, well, we'll do this if you build affordable housing here, apartments, and not just regular ones, for example. Or make it mixed use or whatever the thing is. Okay. Anything on that?
No, just look at the overhead.
Yeah.
30 spots in there. Because it connects down to,
It'd be great to connect it all to the office park. That was sort of my imagination. But anyway, it's a little pie in the sky. Anybody on the phone? And Suzanne, I'm sorry, this not. We weren't getting the details too much yet. But anything you wanted to say, or anybody else on the phone on this topic?
If you guys can hear me, just thank you for including me in the invitation. I appreciate that. I tossed in the chat just a quick message to say that we would appreciate when that housing advisory board is being formed, that the Home Builders Association has the opportunity to designate somebody to be a part of that, along with other stakeholder groups. So, we do look forward to meeting the new housing manager when that person gets hired, and then moving forward in discussions.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a reasonable request and noted, I guess, on this side. Okay, 20 minutes left. All right, we're doing good. Let's go back to RCA then. I thought this would take longer than it was, so.
Could we please talk about downtown? I
Yes.
I asked Russell to join us.
Okay,
If he could do
yes.
that, If you don't mind.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
Yes. It was it anyway. Your ideas are more important, so yeah.
So Russell, are you there?
Thanks, Mark.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I think yesterday we talked about having you share, or maybe, I don't know who has it up, share the downtown layout.
Yeah, sure. So I can bring that up. So you should be able to see it now. So just to give you some brief background of what we're looking at the Saunders and Templeton lots. Originally, we were looking at the possibility of acquisition of this existing parcel where we have gravel parking, and also this parcel that fronts on Saunders Street. In discussions and reaching out to those owners, Steve Adams had been working on that. And for the purposes of our current effort, that's not going to be a possibility. Those owners are working together. They are relatives, and they've got some future plans they're thinking about. So since that's not an option to purchase at this time, we're not including that in our proposed parking expansion or paving for downtown. But what we have focused on is there are in the northern lot off the end of Templeton Street, there is a small house that the owner currently rents out. And there's also the Williams property, which is a triangular piece of property at the back of Templeton Street with a house that sits on that property that, as I understand, at one time that house was moved, but that's currently where it sits. So working with our consultant, we were trying to maximize the potential for additional spaces back in this lot. There may be future opportunities long-term working with these other private owners on these larger parcels, but for now we're continuing to, operate our gravel parking under a short-term lease. And police have, I think, an informal agreement to park some vehicles over on the other lot. But eventually those may be developed and may be an opportunity for the town to expand parking in cooperation with those owners. For now, if we're proposing to do something as part of the downtown plan design efforts, what we've looked at is optimizing the layout we've got up here. It's kind of an odd-shaped parcel, this triangle. So one of the things we're running into is obviously we'd have to relocate this smaller house if we acquired that property, and we'd also it appears looks like we'd have to shift the Williams house about 15-20 feet north
and west to get it out of this corner. Otherwise, you've got parking spaces that are right on top of the front porch here, and you've got spaces that would encroach on the footprint of the house here. Now, certainly you could leave it in place, but then you would lose a block of spaces here. You'd probably lose a block of spaces here, and then the house would sort of be surrounded by parking, which I don't know if that would be particularly attractive or not. If you had the opportunity to shift it back and retain all this parking and have more contiguous property around the house. So that's one of the issues we've run into, and obviously there's historic issues with moving the house, and that's one of the things Diane wanted to talk about today.
Russell, real quick before we get into the structure, is your understanding with the other properties there, it's a price is too high situation, or is it a not for sale situation?
Well, I wouldn't say it's not necessarily a not for sale issue. I don't know that we've gotten the message. We haven't gotten that message on these properties like we feel like we've gotten the message on the others. However, in our negotiations, I think those are going to have to continue. I won't say it's a done deal certainly yet. Steve is still talking to those property owners, but in the event that we are able to make it work, we need to have a plan for what we can do with, particularly the historic home.
Thank you. Okay, so you can go into the historic thing now. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, so the house itself is a contributing structure in the National Register Historic District. It's one of the oldest homes in Apex.
Certainly also Lake County, right?
Wait, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. In Apex though. And it used to be up on Salem Street, and it was moved around the turn of the century, 1903 or something.
It was before the tobacco warehouse is in
Okay,
front.
before the tobacco warehouse, but it was moved back. So it has been moved once already. In terms of the properties that we're looking at, these are very important properties for us to hopefully acquire and provide parking because of the standards that were in the downtown plan. This is our best chance to get a significant number of new parking spaces. We have opportunity to convert what essentially are private spaces at the Baptist Church to potentially be public spaces, but this is really our only opportunity to get significant new spaces downtown. So in terms of moving the house back, we have seen houses moved in Apex in the modern time. The Seagrove's farmhouse on 1010 Road was moved back by, I think, 75 feet when the road widening occurred. And as long as the orientation of the building stayed the same, capillary preservation was in support of that. Now, the concern for this property, in my opinion, is the paving of the parking will be more objectionable to them than the moving of the house. So we do need to consider whether we want to potentially have at least some of it be gravel instead of paved around it. That's one consideration.
Okay.
If we do decide we want to move the house, the UDO does not allow us to do that currently without a 48-month delay in the project, which we don't want. That's 4 years. So we do need to talk to you about whether or not we should amend the UDO to allow moving a historic home that potentially has already been moved, because Liz can comment on this. I think there's only a couple.
I'm only aware of like 2 others that have been moved.
So if we craft the UDO amendment to say you can only move it, because right now you can move a historic house if it's not in the National Register Historic District and it's not contributing.
But it's both of those things.
It's both of those
Okay.
things. So what we're thinking is that we would narrowly craft a UDO amendment that basically said if it's not in its original location, it can be moved. And then maybe have some stipulations on that. Currently, for private developers, if they move a house, they have to put a historic preservation easement on the house, which locally, capital area preservation is the only one that I'm aware of that holds these easements. I do not know that if the town wants to keep this structure, if we buy it, if we want to keep it, that we would want to be subject to a preservation easement. If we are going to sell it, it might not be an issue, but it does require certain things, including meeting all secretary interior standards, which we'd want to do anyway. But it does have right of entry to capital area preservation. That was one of the things one of our private property owners was very upset about.
Say again, he was upset about
They
what?
have a right of entry. I think like once a year they can go into the
So
building.
Stanley Smith owns the house on the Peakway. He was very upset about the terms that were in that easement, and negotiating those terms with capital area preservation.
Okay.
Who?
Stanley Smith, a local surveyor who moved the house on the Peakway. That was,
It was
Oh,
moved
yeah,
from the
that one I
crossroads
remember.
site to the Peakway.
It was on like the big stilts.
yes, it was on stilts for a while they built the foundation and then put the house on the foundation.
That was cool to look at. But follow was different.
So anyway, it's kind of a sensitive issue if the town's gonna treat itself differently than private developers. So we just wanted to just find out kind of where you all would recommend we, like, should we move forward with the UDO amendment? We didn't wanna just bring one to council and surprise everybody.
Okay. This is suboptimal. And just so I'm aware, obviously the parking there is not as good as the parking in the other places. Has there been any discussion about not buying it, but just paving that gravel lot, the one that's existing, and just hope we can buy it later? Or is that not a thing?
Well, we run for the gravel lot. Let's just say, we're trying not to rock the boat with the our lease is not super strong. It's an annual renew, and it's an annual renewal, and it's, every year, we kind of hold our breath and cross our fingers that they're gonna say, okay. Cause you heard Russell mention, I mean, the other two, that property and the adjacent property, they have, their family, and they're looking at trying, how do they develop those properties together in the future and what that may look like. That's why, for those properties, that's why it's not like they're not looking to sell.
Okay.
What's
What's the zoning on that right now?
I think they have two different zoning districts, but I can pull that up.
So, I mean, we talk to them, we talk to the family regularly. It's just, every year, okay, it's great, so, and our lease is, they like the lease we have. Now, that's what we've been told. It's like, in terms of what's there, they don't really have an interest in changing what's there. And as long as that's there, like, it's kept the same way. We don't, because we've even tried to, the one thing we have discussed maybe risking is asking if we can get, like, say we are able to do, this lot up here, can we do some kind of cross access, onto that? And we're still nervous about, is that going to disrupt?
Oh, that's why it's designed in the way that
Yeah,
you're doing
yeah,
that.
so we're trying to be very cautious in how we approach that, because if we do lose that, certainly if we lose it before anything else is developed, we might have, it might be a little different, once we get something developed, we might be willing to take a little more risk on it, but if we risk losing that before anything else is up there, we lose a significant amount of parking and event space and everything that gets used for. So that's kind of where we are. As we move, because they don't know what they want to do with the property, so if we pave it and then they decide we're not selling it or we're going to develop something different, however that works out, they're not going to want to tear that up, or either for us to pave it, there's probably going to be something along the lines of, well, if we go to change it, you're going to have to tear it up too. So
You said
it's a little ugly.
all those parcels are one family?
They're
Are they
two.
local? I thought they were out of state.
One is out of state, so the
But
ground.
same family.
The same family, they're married, I don't know if it's blood or if they're married in, but they do have ties. They're not, it's not, yeah, they do
Okay.
have familial ties.
Chapters. And it's just the big gravel lot and the one that, police department's currently using is now there. What about those two to the left of it?
The flag lot is a cemetery, and then the one to the next one over, we are actually kind of feeling that one out to see what might be there.
So it's
future. So,
And the cemetery's not gonna be able to get moved. Okay.
yeah, that's, that's,
Oh, that's,
Yeah, the properties are zoned medium density residential within the small town character overlay, and they are within the central business district. The two that you were asking about.
okay.
so we are looking at that one, because we're trying to look at it as a whole. So the far one, we're keeping tabs on it, because if we are able to acquire the gravel lot, then there's a connection there, there's something to be done. So that is part of it. More immediately, we're trying to figure out, there's this historic house and this other little house right there, and I think it's, was it like 70-some spaces, right, that we could add if we bring that into the fold. So that's a pretty good contribution to our target number that we're looking to get. And so we're trying to
What's
figure
the
out.
target here?
What's the number?
So overall, we need 200 within a 5-minute walk, 100 within a 3-minute walk. And Russell?
Yeah, and this, I was just going to share the parking numbers and go over those. So this is our current draft, and you can see how it's laid out. As far as the permanent spaces go, we added, back in 2020, we added 31 spaces on West Chatham. We added 13 spaces on Saunders. We would propose to add some on North Salem Street from Center Street up to Hunter. Those would be parallel spaces. We currently anticipate, potential of taking away all the 30 spaces in the downtown block as part of the streetscape. And then with the 72 spaces added back, using those other two lots we just talked about, and potentially converting some spaces at Saunders and Salem to handicap, we're getting about 100 spaces net new between all those. Our goal was 100 within a 3-minute walk, which that would achieve, and 200 within a 5-minute walk. So to go to the 200 within a 5-minute walk, we have other spaces that are our leased spaces. In 2019, I'm counting the 48 we added on Seaboard, which those are leased from CSX, but we did pave those. And then we have quite a few spaces with the church, although it's important to point out, even though we go well beyond our number, the church, if they have an event, they may need to close off some or all of those spaces to the public. So anything with a lease agreement, there's always the chance that those spaces won't always be available.
In the church lease ones, that's an official, not questionable lease, and something that's not just a holding off hope that it goes away?
It's not in place yet,
It-
it's something that we're working on.
Okay. It wasn't part of the
Yeah.
zoning for the area? Okay.
It's a friendly agreement.
Friendly agreement. Okay.
We're looking to make it a little more official.
I think the official things.
And they've pretty much where they've been open to that. It's just the timing and working through things.
Okay. I saw the thing, there was some thing in the church too in that area. I studied that thing. It's a private public thing. I don't know what it was, but I liked it. Okay, so remind me what the question was again?
So basically, we need to know if you all would be supportive of us bringing a UDO amendment that was narrowly crafted to allow us to move this house without the 48-month delay, and if you are interested in having us not have the requirement for the preservation easement to be put on the house, because currently any house that is moved is required to have a preservation easement put on it, and currently the only nonprofit that we are aware of that does those in this area is Capital Area Preservation.
Yeah, it's a historic preservation easement and rehabilitation agreement.
I don't think that house is in bad shape, so I don't think that's gonna be necessarily an issue.
And the developers hate doing that, I guess? They have to.
No, developers don't hate it, property owners hate it. So Mr. Smith, that was his familial home that he moved, so he was not happy. If it had been Crossroads Ford that was in charge of it, I don't think they would have cared, because they would just sell it and move on. And so if the town is, I don't know what we plan to do with it.
Yeah, I don't either. I don't know if you caught one of my comments when we were talking about the Tunstall house, or, that was another meeting. All of a sudden we end up with 2 historic homes. We start having, they're not cheap to renovate, they're not cheap to keep up. At least this one, want some time, like, to get their affairs in order, basically, they just want to be able to stay on for another 2 years. Like, so that was part of the agreement, if we're looking at it. Potentially, that's what they're looking for. I mean, they're looking to move, they just need kind of the time to do it. And they're willing to kind of work with us, and we know it'll take time to put these things in place too, so. Of course, when we started that conversation, it's been a year, so they may not, they may be willing to move a little sooner now.
I think
So-
Russell was hoping we'd get them out in a year,
Yeah.
based on our time.
So, but then, yes, we do have 2 homes. What are they used for? You know, does, if having that one change potentially what Tunstall House is used for? Maybe, you know, or you know, what, that's different, you know. The chances of selling it for someone to live in, they may want to live there, but they're going to be living next to a parking lot. So, I mean, you got to connect with them. Or is it something that, can you tie in with the Halley and the Arts District? We haven't had an Arts Council in Apex in a long time. Is it, that's not an uncommon place for an Arts Council to go as in a historic home? I mean, that's something that starts up and goes there. I mean, so there are things that can be done, especially with it being downtown, that can be used for events. And it is in better shape, but again, you're taking on 2 historical homes. And I don't see us selling it, I really don't. That's my thing, because I think if we take it on, I think it's gonna be ours. So that would be a consideration point for deciding how you wanna handle the easements.
You're not seeing a business wanting to go there?
If the
It's
town
not gonna
wanted
go
to lease it to a business, absolutely, I mean, it would have to be brought up to commercial standards, and that gets a little tricky, it's expensive. So,
But yeah, I mean, business could lease, I mean, I guess potentially a B&B could buy it.
Sure.
That's it.
yeah.
And yeah, so that's something.
Well, I'm pretty disappointed that this parking discussion went in this direction to only look at the other lots. I honestly want to talk to Lori about some things. Some things, you know, before I commit to going on this path, because I don't want to take on or alter or move that house if we can avoid it. I had heard that we were considering some parking on this lot. My impression was that it would be around the house on the back, presumably if we had the gravel lot as well. So.
Okay, so in terms of timing, I mean, we don't need to know today, what,
So we are working toward a public meeting. We haven't publicized it yet, but we're planning on April 26th for an in-person workshop. And we would have a virtual option starting the week prior, so people would kind of have a choice and see if they needed to come to the in-person opportunity. We don't expect to have an answer for how we're gonna address all the parking, but we need to have a good idea of how we're proceeding. Because when people start to see, you know, schematics that remove a lot of parking on Salem Street, they're gonna wanna know what the plan is for replacing it.
And without these in theory, there could be, I know even I voted against it, proceeding, we passed the lot with the small house, that's including some additional parking there, just not that, without any kind of worry about that historic one, right? Like, you can kind of create a little trapezoid thing, parking lot, with that property, right?
With the acquisition of just the small house, I don't think you can really get anything. I think they really need to be in combination to establish circulation for these lots. Because you can see this is the Templeton Street existing right away, and here's the property line for the house. So you hardly have enough. I mean, I guess I see what you're saying. You have maybe enough room to circulate around to get in these spaces, but it's really tight.
so Russell, it would add 9 spaces to our existing lot, and then about half the number of spaces on the small lot, so it would be,
You gotta get 15 or so spaces.
yeah, about 15 for the
15
small
with just
lot.
that one.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't, I would say that acquisition of any of these lots by themselves is good for long-term planning. It's just the question is if we're able to get, say, one lot and not the other one, you know, the question that comes up is it something that makes sense for us to do a parking design and construction in the short term, or do we just hold on to the property until we're able to develop a larger parcel, larger area?
And you could do temporary parking on the smaller lot, sell the house, do gravel parking until such time that a bigger I think the small lot is definitely worth picking up. It seems like that one might be the easier one. I don't think anyone's gonna be objecting to parking going there. Yeah.
Cost and but, okay, so we are a no, you're a no,
Hard pass.
hard pass.
Hard pass.
And the consequence, I don't know if you're on.
Well, that's, yeah.
The questions again are the 40-hour thing, the preservation thing, or this
48
40 years, sorry, 40 months,
month.
the preservation requirement, and what was the, there's one more thing? The gravel?
Well, so actually I didn't bring it up, but yes, we need to change the ordinance anyway, to allow the town to put in gravel parking because we require it to be paved. The gravel lot that's there was issued under a temporary use permit many years ago that has expired. So we do need to change the ordinance for that anyway. I'd rather wait to do it at the same time as the other changes. If the other changes will occur, if they won't, then we'll just move forward with the gravel. I think that'll be fine.
Okay.
That's not really tied to it. It already is allowed to be gravel on historic properties, but because the gravel lot is not on a historic property, we really need to update the UDO for that.
Yeah, gravel, that's fine.
So we're saying, I just want to make sure I'm clear, so we're saying that, so say we move forward with the property, that's another council decision, and when we move the house, we can still gravel the lot without waiting the 4 years, because it fits in with everything? I'm just trying to,
You mean if you don't move the house?
oh, so if we don't, well,
There's two houses, you're talking about the small
I'm
house.
talking about the big house.
Small house is not.
That's
The
what
small
I meant.
house isn't in play, you can
Yeah.
remove that, that's fine.
So, but as far as the big house, I'm just trying to, I want to make sure I'm understanding the
It's tied,
consequences.
it's tied, moving the house means you have to get a demolition permit, and the way the ordinance reads is if you have to get a demolition permit, you have to wait 48 months to
Right,
basically do development.
to do even a gravel in the lot. That's,
No,
Gravel in the back, like if you were to leave the house where it is, since it's a landmark or historic structure.
that's not what he's saying.
Yeah.
He's saying move the house and then gravel in the drive around it and the drive in the back. It doesn't require it'd be a minor site plan, I guess. The problem is the number of spaces.
yeah, I'm sure about that.
10 spaces kick you into a minor site plan.
Yeah, and there's standards.
You could get a temporary use permit, but it would be the same as this one. I'm sure it would be in violation after, because I think I only can issue one renewal. So after 2 years, it would be in violation, just like the current law is.
Is there anywhere else we can put the house, hypothetically, if we acquire it? Does it have to go in that corner? Could we move on a property around town?
So we have not talked to Capital Area Preservation because we didn't want to get them upset if you all were not even interested in any of this. So we haven't talked to them yet. My belief is they would prefer it to be moved slightly on the property versus moving somewhere else. Moving somewhere else means you have to take down overhead lines, cut back tree limbs. It would be it'd be quite difficult to move that house out of downtown, I think.
I see. I would say talk to them now, like, let's look them in and see what they think about it, because I think we're gonna wanna know.
So you
And
want us,
theoretically, you would just move it to the middle of that triangle, would that be kind of where it is?
yeah, it would be the triangle, and that's why it probably would be a non-residential business or town property. It would not likely be a house. I do think the bed and breakfast some people would love to stay there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just,
So
I'm
you
sure the
want-
house can take it, like, it's in good enough shape that we can move, it's 3 stories, right, or 2.5, like.
But I don't know.
We moved it 100 years ago.
That was 100 years ago. Yeah, 100 years ago, it was like, it was a nice new 30-year-old house or something.
Well, it probably did, there weren't tree limbs and overhead lines to.
No, I
contain
think
it.
it was about even 100, probably 100 feet from Salem Street. It wasn't right up on, so like it wasn't, it's still
They
moving
just moved it
100
back.
years ago.
And to the north, are those houses to the north right there?
That's the neighborhood that complains about
Okay,
the
Ernie
vine.
Way or-
Yes.
So you wouldn't want to put anything loud there.
I'm actually okay with
Concert hall.
moving it, I'd be okay with it, facilitating a way to move it to the middle of that triangle.
I'd wanna hear capital area preservation.
So, but do you want us to ask about moving it off the property as well, or just moving it in that triangle?
I would like to hear their opinion on both.
Okay,
Cause I mean, if they move it off-site, I hear what you're saying about that being cumbersome, I'm just thinking from, we can get more
more spaces, right? Like if,
At a certain point, it becomes silly that you have historic houses surrounded by pavement, you know, and maybe it would be better serve the community if it was on, you know, some other property somewhere.
So Russell, because that property is shaped so oddly, are we able to get that many more parking spaces, do you think? Has anyone looked at it?
You mean if you move the house off entirely?
Yes.
I I don't know that we've looked at that. You'd lose I mean, you'd lose some parking to have to gain some back to kind of pull another bay in there. I mean, we could take a look at it, but
Yeah, I'd like to know that, because I mean, that's a
Yeah.
consideration too. If you end up only getting 5 extra parking spaces, it might not be worth it.
And it would be much more expensive to move the house, so.
Okay. Well, I'm sad to hear about the other lots. I was kind of banking on those, and I still would like. Hey, Lori, you still there?
Chris is here. Lori had to leave.
Okay.
Chris Welch is here.
Is he in the building?
We can have the conversation.
He's on the Teams call.
On the Teams call. Okay.
We have the conversation,
Hi.
but it's gonna make it longer, delay, whatever you're gonna talk about, I would suspect.
I just want to find out what our options are. Can we pull together just you, you know, Sean and Chris?
Yeah, it needs to be kind of probably not so public, right? It's, well, the distance is already
Consult with
sensitive.
another lawyer. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that'd be good.
We do it right now, like after the meeting, or a call later if you want. But I'm curious to hear more details about the real estate negotiations and what our options are there. That probably are out of scope of a planning committee meeting.
I also think being in the city is an appealing residential in that spot. We need to put parking there, but anyway, it's the current zoning is unappealing, but that's a different story. Okay, I think we're done, guys. I appreciate a little extra time and great discussion from everybody. Okay, adjourned.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank everyone online too.
We could have given you the RCA update in like 2 minutes.
Go ahead.
There's
Yeah, go
not
ahead.
much. Just,
Well darn, I thought it was, yeah, go
no,
ahead.
I think the interest was, what is the question was, what is the interest from the development community then?
What has been, I guess,
Yeah.
Well, I can see there hasn't been very many, because the Umivara whatever development, which I can never learn to pronounce the name of it. Umiwara, right. So I thought that was a perfect example of a property which could have benefited from an offsite RCA swap, because they had what looked to me to be a pretty unencumbered property, and they could have used more of it, but they chose instead to pay the whole RCA penalty, and that was disappointing. So that's what I want to talk about, is like, if it doesn't work there, I don't know if it's ever going to work, because that seemed like it's pretty flat, didn't have a stream on it.
I think there were some other considerations with that property, given the size, the depth, and whether you could actually achieve more lots if your RCA on site was reduced.
Okay.
So, I have been contacted and had a decent conversation with one person about looking at a lot potentially for off-site RCA and understanding what that means. And I haven't heard anything recently because the development that it would be associated with is kind of moving along a little slowly. So, but otherwise, I just don't think there's been a site that would it just fully make sense for someone to have to go through the effort and the expense of buying the land offsite, because that's the other consideration is they've got to be able to make up the cost of buying the rights, or, the easement, the land is somewhere else. And will they gain, the cost benefit has got to work out.
And another thing I'm realizing, and maybe you guys do this the whole time, is like, as we get more and more developments that are more encumbered and there are more stream buffers, the increased RCA isn't that burdensome to people, because they're able to hit the percentage pretty easily if you have one stream feature on there, and you gotta cover with a 100-foot buffer. So in terms of increasing the amount of resource conservation, it doesn't appear to be doing much. Is that accurate, what you're saying?
I would say we got the information out to the development community, we provided it to them, and I think that they have looked at it, but it hasn't so far made sense. I mean, we look at their pro forma, does it get them additional lots? they have to go negotiate with another property owner. They don't wanna do that. It's way easier for them, and it's an amenity on their site, even if they have to replant it to have that open space. So I think that's, I mean, it's just it's always the bottom line, you know? Does it cost them more time? Does it cost them more money? If it does, they're not interested.
So, the idea he had was some nature group or something would just buy a giant parcel somewhere that would still qualify for this, and then dole out credits, right? That's what you're thinking about, like,
Right, so TLC, like, they do preservation, they buy big lots around the triangle, around Jordan Lake, and the idea was it'd be a potential funding source for them, is they do something in the Apex area, and then they're able to receive some sort of revenue, I guess, whatever you wanna call it, donations in exchange for it.
So if it's legal to do, it might be better to get a zoning condition where they do a per unit donation to Triangle Land Conservancy in exchange for reducing RCA on their site. And then the Triangle Land Conservancy can go buy the property. That might be a more expedient and direct way. If it's legal, I don't know. But it's kind of what we're doing with the housing right now.
Yeah.
And so I could see developers saying, it makes sense for me if I could get down to 25% RCA, I can get additional lots. I don't have to go negotiate with anybody else. I just write a check to one of these nonprofits and I'm out of it. And then
Yeah, and you know, that ties in nicely with, you know, we updated the UDO to have a list of reasons why you would, you know, get your RCA down, solar or whatever, and the idea being to expand it over time, and I guess, a donation.
That reduction in RCA only applies if they rezone the PUD. In the case of Umimura, there was really no compelling reason to rezone to a PUD, so they rezoned it, MD or LD, whichever, you know, just a generic zoning district. So, you know,
Yeah.
that would have to be expanded to be applicable in more, although in zoning conditions, you can, there could be a zoning condition that just reduced the RCA.
exactly, and I actually think that would be preferable. Just kind of the way it is for affordable housing, where we say, this is important to our council, if you would like to reduce your RCA, but we need guidance, like, you know, is it 1%, 5%, what's the reduction?
Well, that's what the UDO amendment was supposed to be, is the guidance.
no, it was flexible up to a certain amount.
It was-
As we said.
It was up to, and then we don't really know, like, what proffers, what equals a 1% in order for staff to say we recommend approval, or even, you know, the Environmental Advisory Board, you know, so we just need guidance, like Diane says, you know.
Would that come from this committee, us two? I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know either, like, you want it to be,
I don't know
you want it to be
either.
fair,
We
you
can
want it to
talk
be,
about it, though.
yeah, you want it to be, you wanna get as much value as you can for it.
It's
It's
Like-
probably roughly equivalent to dollar amounts, I would think, like, we've got to figure out what land would roughly cost and whatever addition would cost, and it would need to be similar, I guess, or somewhat, I guess, within it. You can kind of do it economically, how much it costs to put in a solar thing for every house, and how much the house price goes up or doesn't, and then,
I think it's something the EAB could work on, like, is just try to find an equitable list of, conditions that you could, exchange for reduction in RCA. And I would only be interested in this in conditions where there isn't good RCA on site, where it's a site that's already cleared and it makes sense that the best use is, you know, another lot, as opposed to planting it up for the sake of planting it up. But there's some sites where that's not true, where there is obvious RCA use, so that's a consideration I have as well, is I wanna do these swaps where it makes sense, that housing is a better use than conservation.
they're gonna start clearing lots though, that's what I'm afraid of. They're just gonna buy the lot, clear it, and then go through and clear it. What stops them from doing that?
I think if for forestry use, there's a limit.
There's a time limit if you clear something for forestry use,
Yeah.
but if there's a single family house on it, then,
Yeah, are you talking about an entire development?
like, someone has a single family house on a large property, they just clear all the trees and
Yeah.
then sell it to a developer?
Yes.
I mean, if it's one house, they certainly could.
No, there's a delay. There's a
Can't do
delay in the ordinance. They
Okay.
can't rezone it, I forget. It depends what it is. If they do it not egregiously, which we can't even prove this, it's 3 years. If they do it egregiously, it's 5 years.
Oh, there's a delay, good, okay.
That they can't submit. And so we've had people, but if they turn in a forestry plan there's no delay. And so all they have to do is hire a forester to fill out an application before they timber the land, and then there's no delay. So we've had it done where they take everything out, and then, 2 months later, we get a pre-app meeting. That's definitely happened.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not typical though.
It's not.
That
It
is
doesn't-
very
it's-
rare.
It's happened, but most developers don't want a cutover development.
They want, yeah.
They just don't. They
Well,
want,
if they're fed up with this kind of discussion, they might say.
maybe.
You're always gonna get that one.
I know.
You're always gonna get the one that
Yeah.
wants to push the.
Yeah. What's the?
What if, did I suggest this to you or somebody else? I know Bill Jensen and I talked about this a long time ago, like, the whole point of the RCA in my mind is I wanna get more conservation. That's not happening because the stream buffers are such, enough is already being conserved. Could we make certain areas not count as much for RCA because they're already going to be preserved?
We discussed this already.
You can, and we have discussed it. So RCA originally was set up to protect stream buffers because we didn't have stream buffer ordinances. There weren't stream buffers.
Okay.
So
The
the
state was looking for-
original RCA that was put into the UDO in 2001 was mainly to get stream buffer protection. Later, the stream buffer section was added to the UDO. I don't know if state law changed or what happened, why we could add it, but we added it later. And then at that point, the development community said, hey, you're adding all this on, but you didn't reduce our RCA. You should allow us to count it as RCA, because that's what the whole point of RCA originally was. So, but yes, you can remove categories that count, but it's just gonna increase costs and all that stuff.
Right, and then at some point, there's that balance, especially when you're talking about residential, if you're increasing, making more land have to be set aside as RCA and it reduces their lot yield, then it's increasing the cost per home. So there's a balance at some point, and I just don't know what that amount is. I can't, I don't know where the breaking point is.
In 3 years, it's gone from 27 to 35. I can tell you that. Yeah. Out there. Which, that's not nothing. That's a lot, I think, actually.
And I think what we're seeing in some cases is that lot sizes are getting smaller, but at some point you can only make the lot sizes so small to where,
You can't make it up.
you
But that's
can't make
good
it up
though,
anymore.
like, I mean, in a sense, from a sense of good conservation, that's what you wanna see is smaller lots, but.
That's why we did it. Yeah. But I don't know what the right.
No, I guess my observation is like, maybe you're saying this isn't the case from your point of view, you have a much broader perspective than I do, but, when we see these lots that are more encumbered, all the good lots have been developed now. It's getting to the point where every lot has a stream turned over, or along that pipeline, there's an easement there or something like that. So it's actually, the 35% isn't that hard to hit for a lot of these lots, because there's all these existing features and buffers they have to do. Is that not the case?
I observed a ton of good land still just sitting there.
There's still some good land available. I do understand what you're saying, is that for some sites it's gonna be easy to meet it, and others it's not. The pipeline easements don't count as RCA, because it's private,
I see. Okay.
but,
Alright,
it's not an easy nut to crack,
alright.
it really is.
Well, let's go home, I'm hungry. Yeah. It's 11:30.
Well, thank you guys. Okay, we scheduled for 2 hours, and maybe that's not enough for. I forgot to mention. So I was going to schedule Chapel Ridge stuff next time to kind of close that loop, and I was wondering, can we plan some kind of options for them, and maybe invite them and plan some options for them to say, okay, this council wasn't sure about this. Here's like medium density the way it is. Here's what we proposed in the land use map, and then maybe 2 more things. Maybe what Audra said with the yellow and light orange, and then maybe some kind of just parts of the thing that have higher density. Can we do that for the next meeting? Just kind of start
Are
preparing.
we no longer being streamed? Is it already shut off? Not sure it shut off.
Yeah, I think we'd rather talk with you all and not find out what you guys want first. Whether, that could be done by email too, before we bring in the.
Let's just do it right now. We're adjourned, right?
Well, I want it the way it was, but that doesn't seem to be what will get 3 votes. That's my quandary here. So
One option is just to move on with our lives.
So So what I was gonna suggest is we actually have projects that are coming in, so we have advised them to apply for the land use map amendment with their rezoning. And I personally think at this point, that's the best thing. There'll be public hearings, the people can come. We do not need as the town to change this land use map on our own. The developer can propose it, it'll be in the context of a project, the neighbors can look at the merits of the project and either argue for or against the land use map amendment and not revisit.
Okay.
That's what I would recommend.
That's what I say, like I said in the town council meeting, like at a certain point, the land use map as a forward-looking document becomes irrelevant when there's a plan coming up.
Exactly.
Just look at the plan
Yep.
and decide if you wanna do it or not.
Okay, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
And is that coming up soon? Have they submitted?
We've had a pre-application meeting for the Southern Assemblage. It's likely that they don't even need a land use
Southern
map.
assemblage?
The
I thought it was-
Southern Assemblage.
Yeah, it's the-
There's two assemblages.
So the southern one doesn't need a map amendment.
Yeah,
Okay.
They actually can do it.
You know what, the northern one? and
the
there's
northern one does need a land use
Okay,
map.
and they're gonna go high density then? Okay.
That's what we've heard. I've been talking with the broker representing the owners, that they're very nervous since things got delayed and they're wanting an update.
Yeah, I got an
And
email
I
saying
shared,
that.
I shared the possibilities, like you don't have to wait on these amendments, you can propose it yourself. And in some ways that may be better because then you get to see the land use map amendment in context with the zoning conditions that are being offered.
Okay, I think that's
So
fair.
if we wanna continue that way, I can reiterate that advice.
I'll get a meeting scheduled with Lori.
When, right now?
No, I think she's in something right now, but I'll coordinate something soon.
Yeah.
Or the temporary.
You know,